the World Bank has announced that their World Development Report next year will be on education. So I think there's an increasing conscience among people who work in developing countries that unless we can raise the levels of learning and the skills of our populations, and also, as Lucila said, ensure that they're better distributed, we won't achieve the levels of development and poverty reduction that we are working so hard from these banks. I was puzzled, and also given my role as head of an education division, by the graph where Lucila shows the very low impact that schools as institutions have in fostering these skills. And of course, there's a lot of literature focusing on trying to disentangle the effects of kind of the individual and the family vis-a-vis what the school does. And the literature, like your paper, often relies on the data that is readily available, and is often about these kinds of inputs that are that you can observe. But there's more recent literature that I wanted to highlight, which is perhaps more difficult to generate because it involves actually going into classrooms, observing what's happening, going into schools and seeing the processes in place and how actually teachers and students and principals interact, that quite strongly indicates that it's the quality of these interactions that really make a difference. So it's not the quantity of inputs, but it's really the quality of how teachers and school leaders actually do their work and how they interact with students that does generate differences in skills. And one of the characteristics of high-performing systems is that they train differently and they focus on these interactions rather than just content knowledge and cognitive skills, let's say. So I wanted to say that to start, because we shouldn't be in despair by looking at, how, all of us who are parents have kids in schools. Some of us pay a lot of money to have them in certain schools. So, as a parent who has right now 2 kids in private schools, it was like, oh my gosh. And one of them is a boarding school, so even more, oh my gosh. So no, I am convinced that one of the reasons I choose to have my kids in certain schools is that I observe a different environment and different quality of interactions, and I can see what the effect that that's having in their human capital accumulation. I wanted to also say that this evidence is based on correlations and kind of analysis of multiple variables and how they correlate with the outcome of interest, whether it's labor force participation or earnings. And another way or another strand of research is trying to look through a different kind of methodologies, through randomized controlled trials or quasi-experiments, to try and see whether changes in these inputs can really make a difference. And that also, I think, has provided some different light into whether schools matter and whether teachers matter. There's a lot of research in this country that uses panel data that can really match students to teachers over time, and looks into what are the practices of teachers in classrooms and can distinguish effective teachers from non-effective, and their impact on students is important in terms of the skills they accumulate, and the impact of having effective teachers over time seems to be quite strong. We also at the IDB have a large-scale study in Ecuador where we've been following a cohort of students since they were in kindergarten, and now they're in 3rd grade, and have observed teachers through video recordings and really have documented that effective teachers do achieve much higher levels of learning in students, and that effective teachers can work and achieve these levels with students of various backgrounds. So the key then for policy, and I think it's a finding that you highlight too, is to improve the quality of the adults in the system who are interacting with students, and particularly with students from disadvantaged backgrounds, who are the ones who are kind of getting cheated the most. I mean, none of our students are really learning a ton, as PISA shows. Even the wealthiest students are performing below the levels of the poorest children in some of the high-performing countries like Singapore and Korea. which is very depressing, but also our poorest kids are really at a huge disadvantage. And just to, I guess, kind of lead and then pass on the opportunity to speak to Julian and then to all of you to ask questions. A key thing is how rapidly the world is changing and how our systems are still quite traditional in the way they're organized. And I think a big challenge for our region in particular, but really for all the world, is to recognize that we are forming individuals for jobs that today don't exist. And so that the big challenge is how do we build skills that we don't know really what they are, but I guess the key one is the ability to reinvent yourself and learn new skills throughout your lifetime. And that's, I think, the biggest challenge, one that I know you're tackling in that other report. So I'll pass it to you to make some comments, and then we'll open it up for questions. Thank you.
Great. Okay, so first I want to thank Lucila for the invitation to be here. It's really an honor for me to be in Brookings, and always I want to thank Brookings for organizing this event. So the second thing I want to say is I want to congratulate Lucila for a very nice report. I haven't read the whole report. I have read several parts, but it struck me as a very comprehensive report. This is a very wide topic, and even though it is so wide, they're really trying to cover many important aspects, so it's really comprehensive. And also, in some way, provides a nice conceptual framework about how to think about these topics. And so I think it's a great starting point if you want to know about these issues. It gives you, the most important part that you need to think about. I also like the fact that it's creative, the way how they use PISA, looking at the performance in the first question versus the last question, the application to Latin America. I think it was really nice, and the results are quite surprising. And there are potential different explanations for those facts, but it's something that, it kept you thinking. So it's something nice, not only what you learn, but also that it gives you some question that you want to know more. So I really like that. So I think there is one message that for me is very important, but it's missing. And I think that for Latin America, we're making a big investment in skills, really major investments. We're spending in pre-primary, primary, secondary, and there is about 5% of GDP. This is a huge investment. Imagine infrastructure, roads, ports, all that, we spend maybe 1.5% of GDP. We're investing 5% on this, just public investment. Just in primary, we spend 2% of GDP. And our students are not doing very good. Even if we compare not with OECD, with countries of similar levels of economic development. We are not doing good. So there is really a need to improve efficiency. We need to spend better. And in that regard, I think one of the big constraints is really lack of evidence. So today, Lucila presented a lot of very nice results, that many of them are associations. But to think about policy, you need to know what is the effect of changing certain things on the learning outcome. You need a rigorous impact evaluation. And let's think about concrete examples. So right now in Latin America, there is a big push for extending the school day. In many of the countries, students attend school for 4 hours a day, and several countries have already done it, and others are in the process of doing it, of extending the length of the school from 4 hours to 6 or 7 hours. So this is going to involve a major increase in spending. Like, a conservative estimate would say that would increase spending by maybe 40 to 60% in per student spending. So here what we're talking about is that the country that was spending 2% of GDP in primary is going to spend 3%. So it's a 1% of GDP. That's a massive investment. Okay, what is the basis for that decision? How many experimental evaluations are there about that? 0. There's no. So we are about to spend, for the reason, I think about $90 billion, and we don't have rigorous evidence on that. There are like 3 nice quasi-experimental evidences that have, problems. How much does it cost to have a nice evaluation of that policy? Maybe $1-2 million. So we are going to spend $90 billion, and we don't know what we are doing. And let me give you a couple of more examples of really this that I see as a critical constraint for policy making and for really improving outcomes. There was the program One Laptop Per Child that started, it was launched by MIT and was implemented in 50 countries around the world, and they distributed more than 2.5 million laptops. Basically, they wanted to improve education in the poor regions of the world by providing personal laptops to students. In Peru, we collaborated with the government of Peru and a think tank, GRADE, and we ran a rigorous evaluation, an experimental evaluation of that program. It was very important because the government was spending $2 million on this program, but they were, I think, that really brave and really, I think, committed to run an experimental evaluation of the program. What did we find? There were no effects on learning in math and language. That was the main objective of Education Ministry. So basically, spending $2 million. And this is even a little bit worse because we did a review in 2014, and we found that countries in Latin America have distributed already 10 million personal laptops to students. So this, making a conservative estimate, is basically they spent $2 billion distributing laptops, but it seems that there is not much return. Okay? So big investments, little results. We need more evidence. But let me give you like a positive example, right? I don't want to be the negative here. So let me give you a positive one. And there are positive ones. There is, for a long time, psychologists have been thinking that motivation is key for learning. And if you think about Abraham Lincoln, you know, if you read his speeches, are unbelievable. They're amazing. He's one of the best presidents, the kind of speeches that he wrote. How many years of education he had? He had 3 years of education, okay? So, but he was a person that was really motivated about learning. He learned the book, he read a lot. At some point, there was a wealthy person giving books. He lost one of the books, he had to work 1 week to pay back the book, okay? So, but he did it. And then when he was 18, he figured out that math was important. He studied math several years. So motivation is key, okay? So what they say, psychologists think that many times the problem is that people think that they are not smart, and so that they shouldn't spend time reading because they cannot do it, basically. So there is a very simple intervention that was designed in Stanford and done in Peru and evaluated with a large experimental evaluation where basically they show kids, they do one session, 2 hours, and they show that the brain is as any other muscle, and if you train, you can improve. That was it. One day, they show it, they do it in a very active way, they explain to them that they have to write a letter to a friend telling this, and then they put all the letters on one wall. So later on, they came back and they measured the effects of this. There was positive, significant effects on learning of that intervention. The effects are about similar in terms of math and language of extending the school day, okay? This is incipient, this is emerging evidence, okay? We have to be careful, but what is the cost? The cost is $0.2 per student per year. So minimal cost. So there may be many other things like that we don't know, basically. So I think that I think that in the report they talk about it, but I think that really we have to communicate that we need to spend in evidence to make better decisions and to improve outcomes.
Thank you, Julian. Lucila, would you like to comment on our comments, or are you ready for questions?
No, just to thank you, both of you, and also try to also call for more evidence and for more causal evidence on this issue of what is the impact of schools, or what are the impacts of different inputs into the production of cognitive, but especially non-cognitive skills, since we know that these type of non-cognitive skills are also an input to produce human capital, as we understood human capital before. So just again to thank both of you, not only for this comment, but for all the work that we have learned from your papers. And from CAP, we are trying to build an agenda on these topics. We are also working on many RCTs, trying to give and to contribute to the evidence or the stock of evidence from which governments should base the yep. Hola, hi, yep. Okay, so sorry, and thank you very much for the. So no, again, just to thank you and to say that we are in the same agenda, trying to provide more evidence for the governments of the region on these aspects.
Thank you. Well, now I think is the time for all of you to ask questions to our presenter. Please go ahead.
Hi. I want to thank you for the presentation. I think it's very important for Latin America in general to have more research, especially in education and different skills. My first question to the principal researcher, Lucila Berniell, about the 10 cities that were selected for the research are main like principal cities in Latin America. They are compared to other places in Latin America are very industrialized and are big populations comparing Latin America. Do you think it will be a change in the result of the research based on the location? For example, instead of selecting Buenos Aires, to select Córdoba, or instead of selecting Sao Paulo, to select one of the northern areas of Brazil, and also for you, Mr. Julian, about the process of evaluating and the process of implementation. You bring a brilliant example of how they evaluate a program in Peru, which actually came from research in MIT, but also that research bring to Uruguay the Plan Ceibal, which is a different plan to implement more about computer literacy. How do you think that the change in implementation between Peru and Uruguay can change the process of utilizing in a efficient way the resources for education? And thanks for all of this.
Before you sit down, and for the others who may want to ask questions, can you just state your name and your organization?
Christian Martinez.
Should we take a couple more questions and then I'll give you? Okay, back there.
Hi, my name is Graciela Sandoval. I'm from the National Geographic Society Education. And I have a question, being a geographer. Have you also looked at a comparison among the cities, specifically to look at their educational resources, such as textbooks and supplemental resources, and technology literacy, both of students and teachers, and how to improve professional development and certification of teachers, as well as the structure of schools and their funding source, looking at specifically how they're funding for the internet and bandwidth improvements. These are all topics that have been discussed with reports such as the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation that did a recent report on teachers and how they utilize social media to talk about their profession, and even how they're certified in technology. Thank you.
Thank you. Up here, one more question, and then we'll. Yeah, he'll give. Just wait for the microphone. Yeah, and do you mind stating your name?
My name is Alejandro de la Puente. I'm Peruvian, but I'm a science policy fellow here at the National Science Foundation. So very interested in education. First question is, those 10,000 people that you sampled, they're everything, or are there 10,000 from schools, 10,000 in the workforce? I don't know, because if it's everything, I think it's a very small sample size. Second is, I think infrastructure is crucial. If you look at the plots that you showed that in the first quadrant, you have high cognitive skills and high socio-emotional skills, but I can guarantee you that those people are pretty much from private schools in South America, not from public institutions. So if motivation is to be a key in the development of skill development or whatever, I think infrastructure is crucial, and I think coordination with governments is even more crucial, because the investments that you made are huge, But if there is this vacuum where the governments don't sustain that investment, then you will probably have, nothing will happen in public institutions. That's what I'm trying to say. So just speaking for Peru, though.
Thank you. Okay, I'll give a chance to our main presenter, and then we'll do another round. Do we have time for another second? Okay. Lucila, and then
So
Julia.
thank you again for the questions. Regarding the first one, the cities, when you started asking the question, I immediately say, of course, this is the best that we can get out of skills from Latin America, since we are looking at cities that are mostly or more developed than the others. But then you mentioned Córdoba, and I'm from Córdoba. So Córdoba is a good city. No, I'm kidding. The idea is that, of course, if we go to the rural side of Latin America, we will, especially for instance, in the case of physical development, we will find very serious situations and a lot of inequalities. So this study that is small in a sense, but not in, and I will answer about that afterwards, is having done in cities. It will be ideal to extend it to other locations in Latin America, but for that we still need to advocate more and convince policymakers that measuring this type of things is important, and they should finance and support these kind of initiatives. But you're right. About the geography question, I didn't. Yeah. I understand that you were talking about the inequalities inside the city. I haven't heard of a study that takes into account the differences in school inputs inside cities in Latin America, but we are currently in an agenda to study inequalities inside cities. We haven't done anything on schools yet, but we hope to do some work in the future about this, because we know that inside cities inequalities are also very large. In some cases, these inequalities are larger than when comparing results or inputs across cities. And regarding the question of Alejandro De La Fuente, sorry. The sample size, the whole survey is 10,000 individuals, and it is small for some purposes and not for others. For the purposes that I showed you before, it's not small. And regarding your concern of who are those individuals in managerial occupations, I agree with you. Many of them come from high socioeconomic background, and we all know that in Latin America education is very segregated, and those that attend private institutions are coming also from richer families. And I agree with you on this need that government need to sustain investment in infrastructure and in many other domains of public action during many years, so as to shorten these distances in the type of education that private and public institutions can provide, and also in the results or in the outcomes that we observe from people coming from different socioeconomic backgrounds.
Again?
Great. So about the first question, the role of implementation and the case of Peru versus Uruguay, I think that clearly implementation is crucial. You can have the best project in its design, but if you implement it in the wrong way, it's not going to work. So I think that implementation is key, and there is a need maybe to, governments have to invest also in monitoring what they are doing, and to have, indicators and they can follow. And especially with internet, with a lot of tools that we have right now, monitoring is much easier than it used before. So we should do it and make sure that the processes are implemented correctly. The case of Peru, the case of Uruguay, there have been some evaluations about that particular program, and they show that really the program reduce inequalities in access to computers, for sure. But in terms of learning in math and language, the evidence is a little bit more mixed. Even in the case of Uruguay, I think it's a case that they really did a very nice job in terms of implementation. And that, in some way, I want to connect with something I said before, that is, in many cases, it's not about technology is good or bad, it's how you do it. And in fact, a couple of years ago, Emiliana told us we need to produce some report about technology. Does it help? Does it hinders? In which cases? So we did a review, and we were quite surprised about the evidence. So I said there are no experimental evaluations about extended school day. Okay, in terms of technology in education, at that point there were 14 experimental evaluations, only developing countries. So with that body of knowledge, we were able to really try to see in which cases it worked and in which cases it did not work. And what we found was that programs that just center on providing resources and do not guide the use, do not provide guidance about how to use the computers, the effects were very, very low. In contrast, programs that guided the use of technology, in particular, we operationalized that term in terms of if they define the subject, if they define the software, if they define the schedule, the 3S, if they guide the use, then the effects were much larger and in general were very positive. And in fact, especially when they provided more time. So it was like 1 hour after class or something like that. We did that report, we found that, and then there have been several papers that were done after that basically reinforce that the way of seeing that technology in certain way can really help a lot. So it's a little bit connected with the second question about resources and internet and social media. I think that in many cases, because we observe that there are very big differences across society in terms of access, we think that access is the key. But many times you just provide access, and basically nothing happened. It's like you have to go one step further and to ensure that the access that you provide is really well used. And yes, in terms of the question of Alejandro about infrastructure and coordination, so clearly infrastructure is key. There is a minimal levels of infrastructure that should be there, right? So there should be the school, the bathrooms. There are certain things that are crucial, and if they are not there, nothing is going to happen. So we have to ensure that every student have access to that. But many times I think that we are thinking that infrastructure is key because maybe we see the private schools and they are so nice that we say, oh, that's a key. And so there has been experiences where governments make a big investment in really nice infrastructure facilities, and basically there are no effects. Because in some ways, like, you need the basic level, you need to get there. But after that, if they have a really nice gymnasium or not, it's not going to make a big difference. I was really surprised. A couple of months ago, I went to a workshop in Peru, and after that, I have heard a lot about one school. This is school Fe y Alegría. There is a school Fe y Alegría that is located in the outskirts of the city in a very poor place, which basically is attended by very poor kids. And in 2011, it came first in the country in terms of math, in average score. So basically, it beat all the schools in the country, including all the private schools. And I went there, and I couldn't believe my eyes, because basically, they were playing in dirt, like the infrastructure was really bad. It was not bad. They had the minimal levels, but it was not like spectacular, right? But what you observe is, for example, they had one program that was called Me Gusta la Lectura, I like to read, where they tell kids that if they read a certain number of books, they get some bracelet and they can continue accumulating the bracelets. And that's it. I think that when they get to 500 books, they get a small radio. That's it. That's a program. Okay. Me gusta la lectura. I like to read. That program is fascinating. I was in a third grade class, and they were like, "How many books have you read?" 300. Like, that's more than my daughter. I should bring my daughter here. So I think we really have to think about much more about the human aspect, about how we do things. And really, we have to give the minimum to provide the infrastructure, but not get caught maybe with the other aspect.
Thank you. I'm Marcela Escobari. I'm a fellow here at Global, day 2. Yeah. So thank you very much for, does this work? Yeah? For the thoughtful discussion. I had a question about teachers. In a lot of the literature, it seems that the bottleneck for innovations to take hold on the issue of technology and other things tend to be teachers. And I just wanted to know whether there's any experiments, any examples that you've seen where you've been able to unlock that obstacle and scale it, right? Because there are examples, not in Latin America and in Asia, around the rise of private schools, these little private schools where they have better outcomes and teachers are paid, 1/4 of the public school system. There are others, there are little examples, but it seems that to be the binding constraint, and I'd love to hear if you have ideas of places that have unlocked it.
Hi, María Lucila Berniell from the Trust for the Americas, Organization of American States. I was wondering if the IDB of the CAF have done any comparison of cognitive skills, so socio-emotional skills, between formal education and non-formal or vocational education for vulnerable communities, and what are the findings? We really work a lot in non-formal education settings with persons with disabilities and at-risk youth, and youth that have been incarcerated, and working in correctional institutions, and then working outside in job readiness training and cognitive skills. So I was wondering if you have made any study and a comparison between those settings.
One more? Okay, well, 2 more, and then we'll close this round.
Hi, thanks. I'm Bridget Crumpton. I'm from the International Education Commission on Financing. So I just wanted to say thank you very much for this presentation. It was really, really interesting. And it chimes a lot with some of the findings that we have, particularly the need to focus on efficiency, on the early years, the gap that we see between kind of changes in the workforce and the kind of what types of skills schools are producing. Also, one of our key messages in the report is actually if you focus on results and what you want to achieve and then kind of work backwards on what type of policies or institutional changes you need to make to achieve them, that can work better. And how can we, so that might be something to pick up on. I think one thing picking up on the last set of questions too was around this role of teachers, because when you talked about budgets, we also know that inside those budgets, the lion's share of those budgets is on teachers. So if you can unlock that, you can have a very significant impact. So I think the question is, what kind of research do we need to do, or evidence generation do we need to do more around teachers, and particularly around this issue of socio-emotional skills, which are growing in importance, but where the evidence base is particularly weak. And then a flip question to that is, how do we also use the existing evidence that is there? Because we can see from the examples you gave that often governments are taking policy decisions that aren't based on evidence, like lengthening the school day, or in Indonesia recently they increased the salaries of all the teachers, but that had no impact on learning. So there is evidence out there, but the evidence is not often getting through. So I think there's another piece of this picture here, the kind of political economy piece on use of evidence. Interesting to hear your thoughts.
Last one, and then we'll...
Hi, Maria Fernanda Sierra from the Trust for the Americas as well. And my question is related to adult education. Do you have any insights besides jobs, like learning in jobs and peer education, what you just briefly explained, related to adult education, thinking of people who didn't finish their formal education and are willing to either acquire new skills to access the job market, or life skills to change their mindset. So if you have any evidence related to that, and also maybe if you can link that to Maria Liliana's questions about formal education or extracurricular education. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Great questions. I'm glad I don't have to answer them. But anyway, Lucila, we'll start with you and then go to Julia.
Thank you. So regarding teachers, we can be here discussing a lot of evidence that is emerging now. Now we know that teachers are key. We as economists, because in the pedagogic and in the educational science world, they know this from since, I don't know, ever. But of course, now that we got to all these measures and all these value-added measures, that is makes us more sure about the attribution of what is the contribution of teachers to the process of skill formation of children. Now we know that teachers matter a lot. We have very few evidence from Latin America, and basically most of the evidence comes from the work of the IDB, and especially in many things that have been doing Emiliana and your team. So maybe you can be more explicit about that evidence and what are the things that we still need to understand there. But the things that they were doing, for instance, in Ecuador, are very important for the region and to understand what is the role of teachers in the formation of both type of dimensions, cognitive and non-cognitive. Regarding formal and non-formal education, we haven't done any review on non-formal education in this book, but we are very interested in this idea of non-formal settings for education, and it is related to your question on lifelong education and adult education. And it is special. These kind of things are especially important now that our world is changing so fast, and then we know that many of us maybe will be out of work for or will be more frequently out of work as compared to our parents, let's say. Going in and out of work is something that we should expect in the near future, so institutions need to adapt to this new reality in the labor markets, and these non-formal settings for training for education will be very important in the future, so we are committed to an agenda trying to understand these things better. And I liked your question about the political economy of using evidence very much, because this is important, but it's also very important, the political economy of producing evidence. We have very few evidence on some domains, especially because there is a lot of opposition in some parts or with some governmental officials. We are not very good at convincing them how important it is to do these kind of things, to produce new evidence, but also because they have some incentives that are not very well aligned to producing good evidence on the things that they are doing. So we need to understand a lot more about the political economy of the production of evidence, but also, and I feel more optimistic about the political economy of the use of evidence. And I think that our kind of reports help a lot on that, because we have summarized in each of the chapters of our report. At the end, we summarize what is the state of the art, what is the rigorous evidence that we could use as governmental officials to design good policies. And we give there the state of the art, but of course it's not the complete set of information that we would like to have at hand to produce good policies or to design and implement good policies. But I think that our report helps in the use of good evidence in the design and the implementation of policies. But in the production of new evidence, we are still very
If I may add to that, I'll take advantage of my role. So on I'll talk on both topics, but on the teacher side, I think there is not just increasing evidence that they matter, but also what are the things about teachers that matter, or better yet, don't matter. So we know today that the years of education and what years of service don't really matter for making a great teacher. And instead, the type of practices that they had while being trained, the mentoring that they can receive, and actually what they do in classrooms is what makes a difference. There's besides the work that we've been doing, which is a very extensive study in one country, one of our colleagues, and Barbara Brentz from the World Bank, did a very nice study looking at, with the Stallings method, looking at how teachers manage their classrooms in about 7 different countries of the region, and comparing it to kind of the benchmark of how high-performing systems do it. Our teachers really spend a lot less time in instruction, in getting kids actually in the learning process, than in managing and disciplining and kind of organizing the day, or even in not being present. So that kind of data is very useful for governments to then use in their own training. We are currently finalizing about 4 years of work on looking at particular part of teacher policies, which has to do with how do we attract and select more talent into the profession. Because one of the also findings, and one of the things we're documenting in this publication, has to do with how over time the teaching profession, due to labor markets changes and sort of the evolution of how we as a region opened up access much faster than other regions with similar income. And to expand access in the way we did in the time we did, we had to have a lot more teachers in a relatively short period of time, and we kind of lowered our standards. At the same time, when women were having other opportunities in the labor market, and so the more talented women could now be engineers and lawyers, where in the past they couldn't. So all this is forthcoming, and I think we're looking forward to kind of sharing that and pushing an agenda of, not putting today's teacher in the situation where we're criticizing them because they're not responsible. It's really the way we valued the profession as societies that has over time been kind of the source of the problem. And then just the last comment on the political economy of producing and using evidence. I think that's not just an issue for education. I think that's an issue across sectors, and I also don't think it's just an issue for LAC. I mean, let's not even talk about what's happening in the White House at the moment on using data and evidence. But I did want to plug in 2 announcements, I guess. We have just launched just to backtrack on that, we are very committed also and working really hard like CAFES to try and facilitate data and evidence for education policymaking in our region. And one of the limitations has to do also with not only is most of the research evidence in academic journals and not really processed for policymakers, but also mostly in English. And so we are developing 2 initiatives which are complementary. One of them is CIMA, which stands for Centro de Información para el Mejoramiento de Aprendizajes, or Center for the Improvement of Learning Outcomes, CIMA. And it is basically a statistics portal that is user-friendly and that has all data from all other sources in a user-friendly way on education systems in our region. And it's in Spanish, Portuguese, as well as English. And then the second initiative is in partnership with the Fundación Chile, based in Santiago, to try and launch an innovation and research lab for our region called SUMA, S-U-M-M-A. And the idea is to have a platform where policymakers can go and sort of find the latest evidence, that these kinds of reports produce, but up to date in Spanish and Portuguese and English, because we also work with the English-speaking Caribbean countries, but also to go beyond what works into kind of why does that work? What are the kind of implementation guidelines? Someone was talking about the importance of implementation. So if a program is successful, then SUMA is going to actually document how it was implemented and what were some of the problems in implementation as well as successes so that others don't make the same mistake. And lastly, it has sort of the spirit of promoting innovation that is, trying new things so that, as someone was saying, teachers are more free and have more data and more possibilities of accessing innovation. So just a plug on that, and I'll maybe let you respond finally, and then we'll close.
Very good. I just am going to add a little things because I think the questions were covered really well by Lucila and Emiliana. About the question of socio-emotional skills, about formal and non-formal environments, as part of the flagship that we are going to put out this year, there's going to be a review of different interventions that focus specifically on developing socio-emotional skills that could be done in formal or non-formal environments. And let me tell you that the results are kind of quite positive, that there are basically it seems that there are experiences, some evidence saying that we can improve skills, formal, non-formal, it depends sometimes the type of skill. The only issue there is that the evidence is mainly coming from very small studies, maybe at times randomized, but very small, where it's difficult to go from there to say to a country, launch this program and it's going to work. So I think that we have kind of a step that we need to go beyond that. It's like, let's do a large scale, well done, let's make sure that this works at scale before we really try to recommend this to countries. But I think that there is some basis, and psychologists have worked a lot on this, and they have done great work on that. About the issues of using existing evidence, I completely agree. That's a big issue, and there are several initiatives. The education division is I think, the two initiatives that Emiliana talked about, they are going to be great. And also the flagship that we're going to produce this year, together with the flagship, we are going to launch a web page that basically provides the evidence on skill development along the life cycle in a systematic way. So basically systemize the evidence, and the goal here is to make it easier for policymakers and anybody that want to have an informed opinion to go and look at the evidence and then take their decision. So the last question is a really tough one. It's about adult education and how we can improve skills and labor outcomes of individuals, especially of those with low, basically that they haven't accumulated much skill up to that point, and so what do we do? And to be honest, that our vice president that is above us is the question that he's been driving us. It's like, think about that guy. Think about the guy that is 20 years old. He dropped out from secondary school. He has 40 years ahead of him in the labor market. What do we do with him or her? So, unfortunately, the evidence is so far we know about something that don't work, but we don't know much about what works. And I think that there is really a need there for experimenting and for working about what we can do, and even in the margin. Maybe the effects are not going to be huge, but we need to think about these people and how we can improve. Clearly, for people that have a good basis, as Lucila mentioned, they arrive to, they are 18-year-old and they have all good general skills, then acquiring specific skills is much easier. But the big issue is the people that are 18 and don't have them. So it's a big question that we have to work going forward. So
our time together has come to an end. On behalf of Brookings Global Program, I wanted to thank our presenter, our commentator, and all of you for being here. Thank you very much.